everybody! My name is Maya and welcome to my channel. In today's video, as you can tell, I am in my garage because I'm going to be making a kayak cart that's going to help me with transporting the kayaks from the car to the body of water whenever I go on a kayaking trip. This design in particular is super easy to make and the materials are also pretty affordable. So I actually already have one of these carts made and I made it sort of like as a test run, and also because we have two kayaks. One of them is my kayak and then the other one is sort of like a family kayak that everyone else uses. So this is the finished product of the first cart. Now I know it's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it is homemade, so it's really rewarding, I think, to use something that you've created. So this is the finished product of the cart that I already did, and this is exactly what I'm going to be showing you how to make in today's video. So in this video, I'm going to be putting together another one of these carts, and I'm going to show you the whole process along the way. The kayak that I'm making this cart for is the Ascent 10T, which has a length of 10 feet and a weight of 67 pounds, so it's a pretty heavy kayak. You can use this cart for a lot of different models of kayaks, but the only thing you wouldn't be able to use it for is kayaks that don't have scupper plugs, which are these little drain holes that go from the top of the kayak all the way to the bottom. And the only reason that you wouldn't be able to use it for kayaks without scupper holes is because that's how the cart actually attaches onto the boat. I'm super excited to start putting another one of these carts together and showing you guys the whole process along the way. So let's jump right into it and start making this cart. So the first thing that I'm going to do is go over all the materials that you'll need to make this cart. So the first thing that you're going to need is a 5-foot piece of 3/4 inch PVC pipe. Next, to connect that PVC pipe, you're going to need 3/4 inch T-connectors, and you're going to need 5 of these. Next, you're going to need a 2-foot long 5/8 inch threaded rod. You're also going to need some cable ties, but you only need 2 of these, so you don't need to get a huge package. You're also going to need 2 tires. These are 10-inch tires, and I found them at Harbor Freight for about $8 each. You're also going to need a PVC primer and cement for gluing everything together. And this is the hardware that you're going to need to assemble this cart. So this is a kit that I got, and everything is 5/8 of an inch, and it comes with hex nuts, flat washers, and lock washers. You're going to need 4 hex nuts, 2 flat washers, and 2 lock washers. And then for a little bit of padding on this cart, I used a pool noodle. And finally, just some extra supplies that might help you: a tape measure, a Sharpie, a pair of scissors, and then I use these PVC cutters, but if you can find another way to cut the PVC, that would also work. And then right here is just a list of everything I just mentioned and the individual cost for each thing, and it comes to a total of $47.50. So now on to actually building the cart. So I'm going to start by measuring 10 1/4 inches up on the PVC pipe, which I'm marking right here with a Sharpie, and then I'm going to measure a second piece of 10 1/4 inches, which you can kind of see I measured from the end of the last piece to the beginning of the new piece, if that makes sense. And then after that, I'm going to measure 2 4-inch pieces, and I'm going to do the same thing, just kind of slide the PVC pipe down and use the mark of the last piece to mark the beginning of the new one. And then after everything is marked, I'm just going to use those PVC cutters to cut it out so that I end up with 2 pieces that are 10 1/4 inch long and 2 pieces that are 4 inches long. And then after those smaller pieces are already cut out, I use the remaining PVC pipe to mark 2 12-inch or 1 foot long pieces. And then I use those PVC cutters to cut them out. So after this is cut, we're going to have 2 pieces that are 10 1/4 inches, 2 pieces that are 4 inches, and 2 pieces that are 12 inches. And I do have a little bit of PVC left over, and if you got a 5-foot piece, you should have a little bit left over too. So now it's time to get out that PVC primer, and we're going to start applying it to some of the T-connectors here. So on 2 of the T-connectors, you're going to put the primer on the inside edge of all 3 openings, and then on the other 2 connectors, you're going to put the PVC primer on, but only on 2 of the openings, and it's going to be one of the outside openings, it really doesn't matter, and then the opening on the top there. And then once all of those connectors have the primer on them, you're just going to let them sit and kind of dry for 5 minutes. So while that primer was drying on the connectors, I started applying it onto the PVC pipe pieces, and on these pieces, as you can see, you actually put it on the outside. So on the 4-inch pieces, you want to just put about 1 inch to 1.5 inches thickness of primer on each end of the pipe. And then once those 4-inch pieces are done, I'm just going to set those aside so that they can start drying, and I'm going to start doing the same exact thing to the 10 1/4 inch pieces. Just kind of putting that primer around the outside, about 1 inch to 1.5 inches thickness, and you do this for both of them on both ends of the 10 1/4 inch pieces as well. The 12-inch pieces are a little bit different. You're going to apply the same amount of primer, about that like 1 to 1.5 inch thickness on it, but you're only putting it on one side of the 12-inch pieces, not both sides. It's just because of the way that when we put it together, the 12-inch pieces are what actually sticks up and kind of goes through those scupper holes to attach onto the kayak, like attach the cart onto the kayak. So you don't actually need anything on the other end of these, so you just put the primer on one side. And then I just kind of let everything sit for about 5 minutes to make sure it was nice and dry. This primer does dry pretty quickly, so I didn't have to wait for very long, but now I'm just going to start putting a second coat of primer on all of the areas that I already had primer on before. So you can see I'm putting it again on the inside of all of these connectors, on the 2 that have 3 sides done and 2 that have 2 sides done, just going over that primer I already put down. And then I'm just going to go over the outside of all of the PVC pipe that I already added primer to. And then once the second layer is complete on all of the pieces, I'm just going to set everything down and let it dry for another 5 minutes. There's really no set amount of time you have to wait for this primer to dry. Mine dried pretty quickly. I would say 5 minutes is probably a good rule of thumb, but if yours dries sooner, then you can go on to the next step sooner, and if it takes a little bit longer, then just wait until it completely dries. You don't want it to be like sticky or dripping wet, and the primer is a little bit like, I guess, drippy. I don't know, it's very liquidy, so I always brush the brush off inside the container before applying it so that it's not like dripping all over the place, and even still I had some issues with that. You can kind of see on the outside of the elbow connectors, I do have a little bit of drippage on the outside, but that's totally fine. There's really nothing wrong with that. It's just gonna kind of affect the way it looks, but I don't really care about that. It's just meant to be functional, and this is definitely going to be functional, so just wait for everything to be nice and dry, and then whenever it is dry, feel free to move on to the next step. So the next step is going to be working with this PVC cement, and this stuff is less liquidy than the primer is, so it's a little bit easier to work with, but I still like to kind of brush it off on the top of the container to avoid any drippage on the inside of the PVC pieces. So on one of the elbow connectors that we only used primer on 2 ends of, I'm going to apply the cement to the inside on top of that primer, and it's going to be on the outside end, not the end that's sticking up. And then I'm going to also take one of the 10.25 inch pieces of PVC and apply it to one of the ends where that primer is. And once that PVC cement is applied to both the connector and the PVC piece, I'm just going to push it all together. And whenever you're connecting things, like attaching the connectors to the actual PVC pieces, you want to make sure everything is pushed together nice and snug. And on the other PVC connector that only has 2 of the ends painted with primer, I'm going to do the exact same thing, just apply that cement to the outside piece there, and then also the other end of the 10.25 inch piece of PVC that we just attached to the other connector. And then once the cement is on both pieces, I'm just going to push those 2 together nice and snug. And once both of those connectors are on that piece of PVC, I'm just going to make sure that the angle of the top of the connectors that's coming out is even on both sides. So I'm kind of like standing it up here and looking it from above and twisting it to make sure everything is nice and even. So then out of the top of one of the PVC connectors on this contraption we've sort of put together so far, I'm going to apply a little bit of the PVC cement, and now we're going to use the 4-inch pieces. So I'm going to put the cement on one of the ends of primer on the 4-inch pieces, and then I'm just going to put that piece right into that connector, and again make sure it's fitting nice and snugly in there and that it's pushed down as far as it can go. And then I'm going to repeat that exact same process on the other side, sort of put that PVC cement on the inside of the top of the connector, and then get the other 4-inch piece and apply the cement on the outside where one of the primer stains, I guess, is, and then push that 4-inch piece right into that elbow connector. So this little contraption that we've made so far represents sort of like the base of the cart that we're making. So before I move on, I just like to look at it from the top and from the side and make sure that everything is pushed together nice and well and that everything is nice and even. So then I'm going to take one of the T connectors that have all 3 inside ends painted with PVC primer, and I'm going to paint the top sort of end of it, I guess, with the PVC cement. And then I'm going to take one of the 10.25 inch pieces, the one that we didn't use, and I'm going to put the PVC cement on one of the outside ends there, and then I'm just going to push it all together like this. Then I'm going to take the remaining T connector and do the exact same thing, paint that top inside end there, and then take the other end of the 10¼ inch piece and put that PVC cement on there, and then push it all together. And then again, once this is all put together, this sort of piece here, I like to make sure that both of the connectors on the ends are nice and even, that they're at the same angle, and that everything is pushed together nice and snugly. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cement on the inside of the two ends of the PVC connector pieces that had all three inside ends painted with the primer, and also on the two outside ends of the 4-inch pieces that were kind of sticking up from that initial sort of contraption we made. And I put the cement on all 4 of these things at the same time, and I just kind of make sure that these are generously coated with cement here. And then once that's complete, I'm just going to insert those 4-inch pieces into the T connectors on either side there, and then push it down as far as it will go so that it is nice and sturdy, and it'll fit together beautifully just like this. So this is our new and improved contraption right here. So now I'm just going to put some of this PVC cement on the inside of the T connectors, and these are the connectors that had all 3 insides painted with primer. And I'm also going to put some of that cement on the end of the 12-inch piece that we put the primer on. And once that cement is on both the 12-inch piece outside and the inside of that T connector, we're going to just put that 12-inch piece right into the connector, again making sure that it's in there as tightly as possible and it fits nice and snug. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side, apply that primer onto the outside of the 12-inch piece and the inside of the T connector, and then push everything together. And it should fit nicely, and this is also why we needed all 3 sides of 2 of the T connectors painted, is so that we could obviously attach 3 pipes to each of them. And it's why we didn't paint the tops of those 12-inch pieces with the primer, is because those are meant to be sticking out, and it'll look just like this when everything is put together. So now we're done with the cement, and we're going to move on to the hardware. So I'm going to start by putting the 2-foot metal rod through the open end of the PVC that we have here. So before putting these hex nuts on, I like to just kind of eyeball the thread rod and make sure that there's about even amounts sticking out on either side. Now it doesn't have to be perfect, but it'll definitely help us later on. So I'm just going to screw one of the hex nuts onto either side of the rod here. And then once those hex nuts are on sort of loosely and it looks about like there's even amounts of the rod on either side, I'm gonna take those hex nuts and sort of push them onto the insides of those PVC connectors that had no primer or anything on them, and push them about halfway in. You can see they fit pretty nicely in there and pretty snugly, so that's just what we're doing up to this point. So then once those hex nuts are snugly in place in the ends of those PVC, they shouldn't really move anywhere. So now I'm going to use a tape measure and just kind of measure each end of that threaded rod and adjust it just by turning the rod, and it'll make it become longer on one side and shorter on the other, and just do that until they're about even on both sides. It doesn't have to be perfect, but just try and get it as close as possible. So from here on out, we're going to be doing everything equally on both sides. So I'm starting by putting a lock washer and then a flat washer on the right side here, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side, a lock washer and then a flat washer on the other side. And then once those are in place, it's time to put our wheels on. So I'm just going to put the wheel on the right side here, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side, put that wheel right on, and now it's starting to look like a kayak cart. So then once those wheels are on, we're just going to put a third hex nut on, well, second one for this side, but third total, and screw that in so that the wheel is sort of snugly held in place there, and then do the exact same thing on the other side. So this is like the fourth total hex nut, but the second one on this side, and just screw it in so that it's snug, but you don't have to get it super tight yet. That's what this wrench is for. So you don't have to like get it extremely tight, but just get it tight enough where it's not going to come undone. So I like to do just a couple turns here, and that should be all you really need. And again, just do that on both sides so that everything is held together nicely and so that it's even on both sides. So then I'm going to take our pool noodle right here, and I'm just going to use our measuring tape once again, and I'm going to measure 10 inches on this pool noodle and just make a little mark with the Sharpie, and then I'm going to use the scissors to cut this pool noodle right where that mark is. This does not have to be perfect. The only thing that the pool noodle is really used for is some padding so that the kayak isn't rubbing up against PVC. And then once that pool noodle is cut, I guess lengthwise, you want to cut it the other way. So I guess this is actually lengthwise, but you want to cut it down the side like that so that it has a slit in it. And then you just attach that pool noodle onto the middle piece of PVC like I show right here. And then take the 2 zip ties that I mentioned earlier in the video that you'll need and just use those to kind of cinch that pool noodle down onto this piece of PVC. If you want to use more zip ties, you totally can. 2 is sufficient. And then once those zip ties are on and holding that pool noodle down, I just use these wire cutters and cut the ends of that zip tie off. And this is the finished kayak cart. This part right here is just for padding against the kayak so that it's not rubbing up against this hard PVC. And then this is the cart, so let's go give it a try. So like I mentioned earlier, this kayak is pretty heavy. It's 67 pounds. So in order to get this cart on it, I like to tip the kayak on its side, and then you use those 2 ends of the 12-inch pieces that are sticking straight up and just kind of put them directly into the scupper holes just like that. And then stand the kayak up, and then you take that 5th T-connector. I'm sure you were wondering why you needed 5 when you don't use 5, but you're gonna just put that on top of one of the 12-inch pieces that's sticking up. It doesn't matter which one. And then as you can see, this works really well. You can move it forwards, you can move it backwards. It's super sturdy and it looks great. So that's the process. I personally think the finished cart came out looking very good, and it's gonna be a great lightweight and reliable option for me to move my kayak from the car to the water whenever I go on a kayaking trip. Before I end this video, I just want to put a little disclaimer in because this cart isn't really for use on rugged terrain. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a sturdy cart when it's all put together, but things can always go wrong, and in my books, it's always better to not take the risk if you can avoid it. I'm really glad you're able to join me for this video, and I hope you enjoyed watching me put this cart together. If you do end up using this design, be sure to let me know in the comment section below and let me know what you think of it. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and I guess I'll see you in the next video.